once we start strengthening our democracy, maybe we'll have better public transport. And once we have better public transport, we'll probably acknowledge more democratic values more. Mobility for women is extremely limited. I think in Delhi, our study that women are now feeling free to go out, even if it is not just for work. So it does not matter because it does not cost. So they do not have to take permission.
It doesn't matter how good the transport is. People think, actually, I need a car because I've arrived and I have a great job. And what it means to arrive and have a great job is to get a car, not to walk to the bus stop. A developed country is not a place where the poor have cars. It's where the rich use public transport.
Welcome to SystemShift, a podcast from Greenpeace which explores how we can create an economic system that benefits both people and the planet. The theme of this series is change, and each episode we speak to guests across the world to hear how they are changing the planet for the better. Hi, I'm Carl, and I'm your host for SystemShift podcasts in the first 2 seasons.
I'm Yewande. I'm a writer, and I also work at Greenpeace on how to use storytelling to tackle the climate and biodiversity crisis. You might be listening to this episode on your way to work or coming back home. If you live in the metro area of a city like Lagos, Manila, Jakarta, Bogota, Bucharest, or Bengaluru, probably spending a significant part of your day stuck in traffic.
And for this episode, we're asking the question, buses are free for women in Delhi. What can the world learn from that?
We'll be exploring how better public transport could reshape cities by reducing traffic, for instance, cutting pollution, improving access to jobs, to culture, education, essential services, and making them safer for all, especially for marginalized communities. We'll look at Delhi's public transport system in particular and how it's been transformed by prioritizing women.
And on our Instagram page, we asked you the following question. What would make people more likely to use public transportation? And what do you think would be the most common answers here, Yewande?
What would make most people more likely to use public transport? Cost comes to mind, maybe. Cost and safety are the two that I think. What were the results?
Well, those are certainly among the two that people also proposed. But one thing that's really important for people, and actually the most common answer of all, was more routes, like more accessibility and more interconnectivity. So you can get from point A to B in an easier way. Safety and better vehicles, I assume, like higher quality and more clean and whatever that could be, or less environmentally polluting. And so first, more routes, lower fares, better vehicles, and then more safety. So you're right among your fellow citizens in your opinions here.
Fascinating. I know that another question we asked on the Instagram page, if you had to describe public transport in your city with one word, what would it be? And here's what some of you had to say.
Unreliable. Comfortable. Inaccessible.
Insufficient.
What would you say to the same question?
If I had to describe public transport in my city with one word, what would it be? Divisive. I would say divisive, expensive, unsafe, hard to use.
In this episode, we're joined by Nishant. He's a researcher associated with the Transportation Research and Injury Prevention Center in Delhi. And he's part of the group of people who developed the Riding the Justice Route report for Greenpeace India. And it's an interesting report about the experiences from introducing so-called pink passes in Delhi, which meant that all women, could travel for free on the buses in the city's transport. So I think it was really interesting conclusions, and we're going to talk more about those with him.
Hello, Nishant. Yes, really good to connect with you. Welcome to the podcast, and thanks for joining us today. One of the first questions actually is just like an icebreaker. Would you be willing to teach Carl and I a short sentence or a proverb or a word in your preferred language?
I think one of the things that movement groups in India are, at least in North India, I should add, they often use to greet each other or to collectively to each other is through the word Zindabad. Zinda is in Hindi, Urdu, Hindustani language is alive, someone who's alive. So you actually greet each other to, just confirm through each other's, communication that we are alive. And that's called Zindabad. So Zindabad Sathiyo, Zindabad comrade, Zindabad, friends. I think that's a very nice word to exchange with each other.
Indeed, and you predicted thousands of years ago the oncoming of AI.
Is that Zindabad? Zindabad.
Yes.
Excellent.
Zindabad Nishant, Zindabad Carl.
One interesting thing that you have been researching and doing in practice is pink passes. Would you like to explain what that is to our listeners?
So back in 2019, Delhi government, Delhi is capital of India. Governance-wise, Delhi is a union territory. So transportation, fortunately, is a state subject. And in Delhi's case, it lies with the Delhi government. So Delhi government started this scheme in 2019, where they announced that buses will be free to travel for women, only for women. No other classes or social categories of population were given this kind of welfare benefit till that time in India ever. With the pink tickets, the differentiation or the color of the ticket is pink, and that is basically to compensate the operator for the ticket that they are, giving to women travelers. So that's the very basic idea. And then afterwards, wherever new elections have been held, it has been part of the election manifesto, and even the regional parties have announced that they will make public buses free for women if they come into power. So I think this has become quite a major political, feature in Indian politics now.
Nishant, you've actually written a report about this this initiative. So, I mean, I'm curious to understand from you the role of this kind of initiative and why it's important, the role gender plays in public transport. I think also the role class divisions play in this idea of public transport. And in the report, could you talk a bit about that report, Riding the Justice Route, and what you have uncovered?
So this report we did over a year almost, tracing different types of benefits and impacts this scheme might have on women, not just who are using buses more regularly, but also on women, some who started using buses sometimes, whether it has become an option for women. So one major thing that we wanted to understand was whether the public transport, and bus particularly, has become an option for women if it was not before. And second, I think is a very important part of the scheme, how it actually entered into the policy act areas where not many people had thought about such a scheme as an intervention. For example, I'm referring to the labor force participation as a thing. Women labor force participation, women participating as a workforce in India, it remains low. The rate of participation remains low, particularly as you go little bit higher in the income classes.
Yeah, I read the surprising statistics there that 53% of women hadn't left the house the day before when asked, like, did you leave the house yesterday? And 53% answered, no, I didn't. Yeah. That's a really high number compared to Europe and US, for example.
Travel itself does not hold a value for people in India as much as people, in other cultures probably does. People do not want to go out or do not want to say that it is worthy to go out unless there is a specific purpose, which is like very important, such as work or school. And traveling for leisure, just going out, especially for women, is considered extremely unnecessary, potentially harmful for themselves, and potentially ruining the culture, public culture in that sense. There's a very interesting study. I think the same study looks at the age-wise distribution of how women go out. And if you look at that, of course, the younger women have to be protected from the public spaces because it's not safe for them. Married women cannot go out because they're married. So there's a very small window where women actually can feel entitled to actually go out in this kind of culture where mobility for women is extremely limited. This was an area where not much thought had gone into making public transportation free to intervene to change this thing. I think in Delhi, our study and some other independent studies by other researchers also are showing that this is a major area where there has been a major impact, that women are now feeling free, more relaxed to go out, even if it is not just for work. So it does not matter because it does not cost. So they do not have to take permission. They do not have to explain. They do not go anywhere. That's a major impact. 25% women never use the bus who now at least sometimes use the bus. So it's a major improvement after the scheme. You got 1 in 4 women who are new to bus, who would not have traveled by bus or used the public transport. The bus fares are very low in Delhi already. $0.05, right? $0.1 for a long journey of 7, 8, 10 kilometers. So I think the buses are, by some standards, already affordable. But given the economic context we have in Delhi or in India, even that public transport is not affordable for a lot of people. And considering there are cultural issues of purpose for which you are traveling, this becomes extremely out of the question.
So this is an account from 24-year-old Kajal, who is based in Faridabad, a neighborhood in Delhi. She says, every weekend, I travel to Delhi for my theatre classes and practice sessions. I rely on public buses because they are the most affordable option for me. However, these bus trips have never been easy. The most pressing issue I encounter is the overcrowding of buses. It not only makes my travel uncomfortable, but also unsafe. I've been subjected to unwarranted flirtation and even molestation during these journeys, which is both distressing and alarming. What's even more frustrating is the lack of accessibility on public buses for people with disabilities. We need a more inclusive and accommodating public transportation system in Delhi, where everyone, regardless of their gender or disability, can travel without fear or difficulty. One of the things we'd love you to talk a bit about is why it matters, why having this kind of robust public system and having all citizens able to use it freely. And because there's inequality in the society, the focus on women creates a bit more of a level playing field for them to use it, more than they have in the past.
I can't deny that we were also surprised when the scheme was announced. I think, and even for the government, I think they did not foresee exactly what it would impact, considering that Delhi has Delhi Metro, which has a little bit different history as compared to, buses in Delhi. Buses were used by masses, working class, always. Conditions have improved in the last 1 decade. Not so much the reliability and the punctuality of buses, but still, with more number of buses being added, it has slightly improved even. But even without that, even before that, I think a lot of people were just dependent on it, even with the very poor quality of service. The public transport in Delhi has largely meant that it is bus. While Delhi Metro is not new, it has been here since 2002. But it only caters to the needs of a fraction of the kind of demand for public transport Delhi has. And the major reason, it is not that people do not want to use it. There are structural reasons also, that being a metro, the stations are far apart, so it's not a last mile. Connectivity is a major issue with metro kind of a system. So it cannot be a standalone public transport system for Delhi, a city like Delhi, where most of the travel is happening for 1.5 kilometers, especially for women, for example. Let's say all the data that we have or from the census suggests that almost 50% of the trips that women make are neighborhood trips, which we can say 1 or 2 kilometers long. So women frequently do not go very very, very long distance, and even men, even the workers in India do not go very long distances.
This is interesting also because when we have a global survey of what people think is important issues relating to public transport, affordability comes high, and also availability, and if the bus stop is close to your house and so on. So those are two main things. But what I found interesting here in your argument is that the free part means that women don't need to justify why they need to go somewhere as they would have. Even for a few rupees, that would still had to be justified for many women, especially low income, I assume. So when this is taken away, have you seen a change in behavior here? Like the purpose of those trips? Maybe people who thought, I'm more free to visit a health clinic, or I can do things that I don't need to justify in the same way. Have their accessibility to health or other services improved? Have you seen any such effects?
Yeah, I think so. Our report shows that cost is a major sensitive issue in the economic context of Delhi. And we show that 86% women believe that walking very long distances is no more necessary, or it has helped avoiding that kind of long distance to walk. It's two things. One, that buses have helped. Free buses means that you can spend a little bit more time waiting for buses rather than walking that distance. You can wait, bus will come, you can hop. The other thing that it also suggests is that a lot of women are very sensitive to cost, that they used to walk, which we have other sources also to tell us. But this also shows that for a lot of women, distances matter depending on how much does that cost. So I think one is definitely that. So purpose-wise also, if you only can walk, the things that you can do is very limited. You can, if your relatives live nearby, you can go to them. If your friends live nearby, apart from the work and other things, which many women do not do outside of their homes. I should add that a lot of times the kind of occupation and the economic contribution women make, not just the non-paid care work, the things, but also the home-based industries exist, and their contribution, which is actually economic, does not pay them. So I think in terms of making the buses free, we realize we show that women think that they can travel longer distance, not just for work, for all kinds of other purposes, for leisure. And the numbers are staggering. 3 in 4 women, almost 70-80% women believing and doing that if they want to use buses, if there is a direct route, let's say, and which is a good thing, that in Delhi, tourism-wise, public transport has a good connectivity. That if you want to go to some of these places, your residential area may not be very well connected to that, but that place definitely has a good bus connectivity. You can use to go there. So that has happened with a lot of university students who can now plan out of immediate plans. For example, just after the college, they can say, let's take a detour and go to that place and then go home. So that they can now do that. It doesn't cost them anything extra.
I think it's interesting. Paris is now really trying to create a 15-minute city where most people wouldn't need to travel for more than 50 minutes. And that's a struggle because it wasn't planned like that. Yeah. But is this deliberately planned as such, or did it just happen as such when Delhi developed?
Delhi already has many cities because over the years of thousands of years, it has been built and rebuilt, destroyed in some ways, but it's not really destroyed, but just reconfigured by people in different ways. And what we call Old Delhi right now in our current lingo, but it was mainly meant for people who used to walk. And it remains so. You cannot change that. You have to basically destroy it completely and then make something new. It cannot be changed to anything else. And that helps Delhi remain a lot more sustainable, a lot more, it makes it a lot more possible to promote these kinds of things because people are already reliant on walking, cycling, buses, which cater to these kinds of spaces. You can walk a little bit to reach to those bus stops and get a bus.
In listening to you, it's clear that transportation and this idea of mobility despite, as you say, not always being at the top of the list when politicians are campaigning, is like all the issues it connects around gender, around economy, around health, air quality, environmental issues. So there's something really central about it. I guess I'm really curious to hear from you, considering this is a passion of yours. What would you like to see? Okay, that happened, and you're part of all these movements. What is it you would like to see in transport? Yes, in Delhi is an example, but even one that can be rolled out in many cities. I'm from Nigeria. I think of Lagos. I think of, the big mega cities that we have all over the world, in Brazil. And what is your sense, considering how important this is, of what should be happening?
Yes, I think since Delhi has already made the buses free, one thing that we have been demanding through a joint campaign with Greenpeace, I think we have been demanding now that there are other things, that you also have to do. For example, bring more buses as soon as possible, which I must add, not to look extremely cynical anti-government person, that this government is really working on. And some of the other cities, for example, Chennai has a much bigger problem to face. In India, Mumbai has a decreasing fleet without any addition. Privatization is a possibility of public transport undertaking that there exists. So other cities also have their own issues which are going on.
We've got a clip here from Geetha in Bangalore.
ತುಂಬಾ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿದೆ ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಬಸ್ಗಳು ಬೇಕಾಗಿರೋ ನಮಗೆ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಾ ಬಸ್ಸಸ್ ಬೇಕು. ಹಾಫ್ ಅನ್ ಅವರಲ್ಲಿ ನಮಗೆ 1-2 ಬಸ್ ಬಂದರೆ ರೀಚ್ ಆಗಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಫ್ ಅನ್ ಅವರ್ 1 ಅವರ್ ಲೇಟ್ ಆದರೆ ಪೇಮೆಂಟ್ ಕಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಹಂಗಾಗಿ ನಮಗೆ ಬಸ್ ಲೈನ್ ಬೇಕು ಮತ್ತೆ ಬಸ್ಸು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಾ ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ನಮಗೆ ಬಸ್ಸಿಂದ ಬೆನಿಫಿಟ್ ಬೇಕು, ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಲೈನ್ ಬೇಕು ಮತ್ತೆ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಾ ಬಸ್ಸಸ್ ಬೇಕು. ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಒಳ್ಳೇದಾಗಬೇಕು. ಕಾಲೇಜ್ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗಾಗಲಿ, ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಗಾಗಲಿ ಮತ್ತೆ ಬೇರೆ ಪ್ರಜೆಗಳಿಗಾಗಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಉತ್ತಮ ಬಸ್ಗಳು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಾ ಬಿಟ್ಟರೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಲೈನ್ ಬಿಟ್ಟರೆ ನಮಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಮತ್ತೆ ವಯಸ್ಸಾದವ್ರಿಗೆ, ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ, ಕಾಲೇಜ್ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ, ಸ್ಕೂಲ್ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಹೆಲ್ಪ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಕೇಳ್ಕೊತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ.
Then we talk about in cities in India where there is no public transport practically. The buses are run by private operators, and there are no systematic maintenance of public transport. Bus stops, shelters. Another thing I was going to add was about making free for all. Now, considering the discussion we have had that this scheme has, this becomes a little bit, reactionary in that sense to say free for all. But I think this was the original progressive agenda in that sense, that it has public transport does not have to have, that's kind of exclusionary nature. Second thing, once it is made free for everyone, and I'm trying to include more expensive forms of public transport, for example, Delhi Metro. If that is made free, or at least with a concession, because currently Delhi Metro prides itself to not give concessions of any kind. Nobody can travel without paying the full price that there is.
And it's a source of pride. I find that interesting. Yes. That's a source of pride. Yes. But when you talk now about Metro and this idea of there are no concessions, I feel like what you're pointing to is the other thing that I really think is relevant when we talk about transport, which is class, social class, and the fact that there's a perception that if you're using public transport, that's like it's about commonality, it's about the populace, it's not special, it's not elevated. So I think it's fascinating that the Metro understood that. And so they're saying, this is elevated. It's not, there's no free here. I just think that's another conversation to have, because there's a truth to that, which is that it doesn't matter how good the transport is. People think, actually, I need a car because I've arrived and I have a great job. And what it means to arrive and have a great job is to get a car, not to walk to the bus stop. And it's like, until we can shift perception somehow and understand,
yes.
Which is, of course, is a long task, but I just think that's such an interesting thing that you're touching on there.
Exactly. And I think mobility has a role, and public transport as a form of mobility has a role in bridging, in making, the class associations. The bus is not just, you go from here to there, because that you can do with bicycle or car or these kinds of modes where you do not have to interact with other person, you do not have to touch other person in that sense. And that's a major difference in terms of experience, in terms of social interaction. You cannot do a bus journey without speaking to anyone. So you have to make space for yourself. You have to give space to other people. Initially, what Delhi Metro brought to Delhi, people wanted to just have that experience. Why? Because this showed that what the elite mobility would does look like. And when they traveled, they felt very disciplined. There was a difference to how you would conduct yourself within the metro as soon as you enter the metro compound as compared to just outside of it, where you will see street vendors and people, are just enjoying themselves and having all kinds of casual gestures and everything. But the moment you enter, there's a CCTV, there's a security guard, there's an industrial guard and so on and so forth. There's a scanning going on. I don't think most people have been fined or have been even closely to get fined in metro, but it's just there. You don't dare to do anything. And so you don't interact.
It's fascinating. Yeah. But also, a quote has been shared with me, which is an interesting quote where it says, a developed country is not a place where the poor have cars. It's where the rich use public transport. It's a quote from the former mayor of Bogota. But it's just interesting, the role again of class. And then I love what you just said, Nishant, because we also had a podcast where we were looking at the urban spaces and loneliness. And this conversation you're having now where you're saying, well, one of the roles of this public transport is you're thrown into the drama of public city life. You connect. It's not always nice and but you're forced to interact with others versus being in your little capsule. So, and when I have ever interacted with, I love public transport, I should just confess. And whenever I use it, wherever in the world, it's fascinating for me. It's just amazing to just observe people. People watching is, if that doesn't sound too creepy, is another favorite pastime. And you get to do that in public transport.
Yes.
Talking about creepy though, from the Delhi study, 4% of the women felt insulted in doing public transport, and among lower class or lower income women, it's 40%. So it's a lot higher risk to be discriminated against if you're a minority and so on.
Yes.
On that point about women's safety, Shweta, who also lives in Delhi, had this to say. It is a common thing for men to sexually harass women in the bus on the pretext of crowds. Often these incidents of sexual harassment are brushed aside. Traveling by bus in the morning and evening is like fighting a war. While boarding the bus, you have to protect your mobile, purse, as well as your body. This has happened to me many times when someone tried to hold me back or press my chest. However, now I'm learning to deal with this problem.
Do you see you could do in India, but also generally to promote safety and a feeling of welcomeness, to make people behave, to make the bad people behave also outside of the metro, but also in the buses? What can you do to achieve this objective?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And we come back to that when we talk about challenges in using public buses. And as Yewande was saying, that the safety for women is a very important thing. Even if it is made free, and then women still feel not so safe. And considering, I should add, it is in 2012, Delhi big episode for people actually coming out in resistance for gender justice, especially the sexual offences against. The laws are very weak at that time against the perpetrators of sexual violence, and that happened because of the episode in a private bus, a rape of a young woman in Delhi. So I think it did shock, and then the safety and the mobility and this whole issue of women not really belonging to public transport as a space did feature very prominently, and a lot of changes have happened since then. It's still not safe yet. I have to add one thing still, that public buses are still a little bit safer as compared to a general public space. If there is an incident, there is a possibility that if you make noise, if you point that out, it is quite likely that people will support and single out that person. The second thing is going to the other. Since India is a casteist, it has remained a very casteist society. The whole issue of not touching other person, or not talking to, being friends with, or not being or hating the other person who does not belong to my own standards of caste or these days religion, is a thing that put into the experience of traveling in public transport also. But you have to recognize that public transport is a space that could potentially be a space where we could act on these things, bringing a lot more harmony and dialogue to overcome these kinds of divides and these things.
You mentioned that a solution could be to make public transport free for all. I think one interesting experience from South Korea, where they let elderly people have free public transport, was that you could actually see positive societal effects, such as less depression, less loneliness, and it was actually beneficial for society because you reduced cost from suicide, depression, and loneliness. I wonder, if you would go free for all, would you think that you could, what kind of collateral positive effects could you see if you would do such a reform in your mind?
I think one is that democracy will be strengthened. That's a thing that that is usually not part of mobility discussions. There will be value changes in the society. Once we start strengthening our democracy, maybe we'll have better public transport. And once we have better public transport, we'll probably acknowledge more democratic values more. That's one. I think the other thing is the kind of possibilities to see the city in a different way. You can, if you walk in the city around neighborhood, you tend to see city in a different way. When you travel in a car, you do not see the city actually. And when you use a bus, I think you see things in different ways. So I think one is definitely, I think, about belonging, and the other is about the change in the values, and which I would like to say that it goes more towards democratic values.
That was a really nice answer. Thank you so much. And I totally agree. And so I think if you have this vision of a public transport and no need for long transport and equal rights and safe public transport, I think there you're coming close to a really truly democratic and positive vision for how a city can development rather than a congestion hell of cars. So I wish you good luck with that.
Thank you. And let's hope that other cities also take up these initiatives.
Thank you so much, Nishant. Thank you.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you here.
So I live in Johannesburg. It's not dissimilar issues of gender and class. Most people, as soon as they can, get a car. It's not cheap to do one, but most people do. Why? Because the public transport is irregular. It services certain areas. But I think South Africa is also interesting because the history of transport is, like many things, deeply embedded in the history of the country and the history of apartheid. Public transport was how Black South Africans were bused, from township areas where they'd been placed by the government into the city or into the suburbs to serve a white minority and then bust back. So the issue of routes is fascinating because there's just this one route, because it's purely utilitarian. It's not about access. It's not about the citizen. It's about the service, the labor. And so I actually like that the idea of more routes came so high, because I want opportunities. Now, what happened in South Africa is we have what was informal, but isn't anymore, but we sometimes still refer to it as that, which is an informal, it's the minibus taxi. So it's the slightly smaller bus. And we call it a minibus taxi, and that's kind of the local parlance. Very expensive, but that system came up in those days because the big buses were not interested in, I want to go see a movie or I want to visit a friend. So the minibus taxi came up because it was informal, it could go different routes, and it could get you to other places that you needed to get to, as a whole being, not just as a source of labor. So So, I mean, it's fascinating. I just feel like, and it's so great chatting to Nishant, but it just feels as if transportation and this idea of mobility it seems like this kind of nerdy, weird thing, but it's so kind of crucial, I think, to the idea of the city, the idea of the beautiful idea of the city, not the ways in which cities haven't worked, but when cities work, they work because you have access and you can do all these things and you're exposed and these things are available. You don't have to own, you can have access. And it should be this egalitarian organism, the city. And then unfortunately, for all the reasons we know, of course, it's not.
I live 18 kilometers from my job in the city center, and I normally bicycle, but sometimes the weather is bad, or I just don't feel like bicycling that far. There is a boat service. I can take the bicycle. You can bring the bicycle on the boat, and you can take the boat, and it's a beautiful view. You have Wi-Fi connection. You can sit outside if the weather permits, and people are so much more relaxed on the boat than on the buses and the metro. Most will just take the metro or the buses. Actually, 74% of the people will use that to get to their job during rush hours. So car is the exception because we have congestion charges here. So it's kind of expensive to take the car. And 75% of those people who pay for it, of course, men and middle income or higher. So they are still stuck to their car mentality.
If I can jump in there then, because that is a piece of whatever policy or legislation that has been put in place, right? So that the use of the car becomes inconvenient. And that's very common but I guess the question to you, and I think it's an interesting conversation we can have because, I live on this side of the world and you live on that side of the world.
South and north, really, truly.
Well, south and north. And I mean, a lot of what I think this podcast is also about it's system shift. There's a system that works over there, and an effective transport system is evidence of that. And there's something that's missed here. And of course there are attempts and there's the infrastructure that has to be built and so on. But I think Nishant's point that the politicians initially were not campaigning on issues of mobility, and then eventually he actually acknowledged that they started to do so, is an important, it's a win that has started. And he definitely obviously understands that we need to ride that, excuse the pun. We need to take that and push and really advocate even deeper for more. And I guess I wonder, one of the things I wonder is, what are the missing pieces to be able to implement that system so that we have a city that is available? Something like the pink passes is something to celebrate, and it's a victory. We need to kind of amplify that 2000, and then we need more of those stories to realize that it is possible and that it can be done.
Yeah, and I think also your history there, that going from the township and have a one-way ticket to colonialism and back again every day, I think that kind of also, we need to change the purpose of the trips and the city planning so that we become a little bit more similar to Delhi, where you don't have one city center or one power center where you need to go, but actually divide that.
I guess I'm just curious about the barriers, because I think that's how we get the system to shift, if we pay attention to what are the things in the way of fulfilling on that vision. But I think what I really was excited the most about, one of the things he said, a lot of what he said I think was really interesting. I think it's a happy, I don't want to say coincidence, but it's a happy connection. This idea of the political space and the movement space. There's this almost by accident moment where suddenly they're the pink passes. I mean, not suddenly, but okay, we're going to do that. And it seems to come out of nowhere because normally there's not been campaigning around that. And I guess this moment of happenstance, and then how to take advantage of that. Because I do think for systemic shift, we need to work, in spaces of power where the decision makers are, where the money is and where the will, the political will is. So I was excited that there's something to jump on and take advantage of. And I started thinking again how to stretch that beyond Delhi, beyond India, thinking of my own city and ways in which engaging with political will could make a real difference with this issue.
Yeah, I saw a video where they interviewed women who have been benefiting from this in another Indian city called Karnataka. There are so many perspectives here that you can't really foresee because so many people live so many different lives, but there are positive aspects that you as a listener could imagine if this would happen in your city, what could you see? And I hope this episode has helped people to see some of the potential benefits of making transport more accessible and safe and free. It's actually a win for society and the climate. So I think really that could help. I think it's also interesting that in like a city like Pontevedra in Spain, where you have a car-free city, and you could see how air quality was improved, how stress level and noise pollution was much better. Every time you say you want a car-free city, people think always like, oh, that's not possible, that's never going to work, and the business is going to collapse. And every single time when you have a car-free street or whatever, you see that the experience is positive. So I wish local politicians would dare to do that a lot more.
But we're really committed that at the end of every episode, listeners can leave, you can leave the episode with some concrete things and take away with you. For instance, if you live in India, something you could do is take the 2-minute survey and share your thoughts on public buses. Greenpeace India is on a mission to make public transport smooth, safe and free, especially for women and transgender individuals.
And you can read the Greenpeace Mobility Vision as well. That's actually full of really interesting facts on how much we could benefit from changing the way we move in our cities and in rural areas. It's a good report with a lot of facts and statistics that shows how we can improve situation in cities and in rural areas if we change the way we think regarding mobility.
Okay, another thing that you could do is if you live in an area with proposed changes to transport, like a new bicycle lane or a bus stop, be very vocal, be very noisy about your support for that. Very often, these changes, even small ones, get knocked down by opposition.
And also support your local transport workers. They're doing your community such a huge favor, and giving them better working conditions and taking care when you yourself are in a car or moving around them. Make their working space safe, contribute to that, and we can all enjoy better infrastructure.
We will put links to all the things we've mentioned, the survey, for instance, and the Greenpeace Mobility Vision. We'll put links of all of this in the show notes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of SystemShift. In our next episode, we're asking the question, how can I think of the planet when I can't even afford rent? Subscribe to SystemShift wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode.